Good morning, everyone, and good morning to those who are watching on the internet. First time I've used this contraption, I feel like a country western singer without my guitar. Maybe I'll get used to it. Zach, you could not have picked a better song to lead before our lesson on how great our God is. Because as we look at my thoughts this morning, I want to share with you, I think we will appreciate how great He is and how much He will bless us if we comply with His will. Amen. I think most of you know that Brady Blizzard is a police officer. He was called to a home last week, and he got there, and a man came out, and the man said, "My wife is missing. She was shopping and has not come home." And Brady said, "Well, how old was she?" He said, "Well, I'm not sure, somewhere between 50 and 60. We don't do birthdays." He said, "Well, what about height?" He said, "Well, I'm not sure, a little over 5 feet tall." "Well, how much does he weigh?" "Don't know. She's not slim. She's not fat." "What about the color of her eyes?" "Well, it's sort of brown, I think." "What about the color of her hair?" "Well, it changes a couple times a year. It might be dark brown. I just can't remember." "Well, what was she wearing?" "She could have had on pants." No, I think it was a skirt. Or it could have been shorts. I just don't know exactly." "Well, what kind of a car was she driving?" And the man says, "Well, she was driving my truck." "Well, what kind of a truck was it?" "It was a 2017 Pearl White Ram Limited 4x4, 6.41 Hemi engine, LED light, backup front camera, moose leather seats, cool seats, air conditioned." Brady says, "Sir, we'll find your truck." If you want to know what that has to do with our lesson this morning, absolutely nothing. But if you ladies find that your man knows more about his toys than he does you, then you're not alone. You may be wondering, why am I speaking this morning? I asked to speak. We have two very capable preachers. Zach and Elliot are both here. They're not on vacation. They're not sick. But I asked to speak because I wanted to share some thoughts with you. You know how sometimes when you read a scripture that maybe you've even read before, something grabs you and it sticks in your mind and you begin to think about that and meditate on it, and it takes you to further study and you realize, wow, there's so much in there that I'd never seen before. And you want to share it with others. Well, that's where I am this morning. I found something by accident, more or less, that seems to be profound, at least in my thinking. And I want to share that with you. As Elliot mentioned, I think at the end of the sermon last week, or the end of the session, as all you know, I'm going to have surgery on the 10th. And half of the nerves that go to my vocal cords may very well be embedded in the cancer. And so they're not sure exactly what's going to happen when they do the surgery and whether it's going to affect my voice. So in case it does limit my ability to speak, I'm going to share this lesson with you this morning. Let me get this thing to work if I can. And maybe I have to turn it on. I don't know, guys. That probably would help if I can find the on button. Help. Thank you. So glad he wasn't on vacation. As many of you know, last week we had our church camp out. And it was a really good time for us to get to know each other better. Last Sunday morning, when I looked out our RV window, the sun was just coming up. And so I grabbed my camera and took this picture through the window. And Linda says, you know, only God can create a view like that. And it's true. Now, only He can. And if we can look at a sunrise like this or a sunset and see the awesomeness of that and not think about God, then we need to reprogram our thinking. But after I took that, I thought that would make a great background for our lesson this morning, so I'm going to use it for that purpose. 2 or 3 months ago, I came across this book laying on our coffee table. I had seen it before, but I hadn't really paid much attention to it. It's kind of hard to see what's really written on it, but as you can see, there's 3 big words there that seem to stand out. The words plans, prosper, and future. And so I began to look at that and wonder, what's that all about? There's nothing inside the book. It's completely blank. But just those words on the outside caught my attention. And as I investigated further, I noticed at the bottom that this is a quote from Jeremiah 29:11, which says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." Those sound like really encouraging words. And so my curiosity caused me to look further into why would God put these words in the mouth of Jeremiah, and to whom were they to be spoken. As I looked in the book, Jeremiah, and began to read what was happening, I realized that this was at a time when Judah and the northern kingdom as well had been taken into captivity by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. And this captivity had been going on now for approximately 20 years. And you can imagine what these people were experiencing. They were captive to a foreign king, a king who did not appreciate or recognize their God, a king who had suppressed them in their freedoms. They no longer had the ability to own property, to do as they will, to work like they wanted to work. They were slaves to a foreign king. And so Jeremiah was told by God, send this message to Judah, to those in Babylon who are suffering from this captivity. Let them know that I have plans for them. I do not wish them harm, but I want them to prosper. They can have hope. They can have a future if they will simply follow my will. This had to be great news to those who recognized the power of God and believed the prophet Jeremiah. To think that God had plans for them, that sometime in the future there would be better days when God's plans unfolded. We know what it's like to have plans. We know that whenever things are not going to happen automatically to bring about the results that we want, then we have to make plans for those things. We have in our day and time people who tell us financially, you got to plan for the future. Financial planners will tell you that if you fail to plan for the future for your retirement, then you plan to fail. When people build a house, they know they have to have blueprints, plans for how that house is to go together, because it's not just going to happen automatically without those plans. Teachers have to have lesson plans so that there will be an end product that comes out like it is supposed to. In the aviation field, there is a saying. The saying says, you plan your flight and David and Steve, you plan your flight and you fly the plan, right? Because you can't just get in your plane and head somewhere and expect to get there without making plans. Several times, Linda and I have flown from here to Phoenix, to Chandler, which is a suburb of Phoenix, to visit her sister. It used to be very difficult, but now with the GPS, I can pull up my laptop or my mini iPad, and I can put that course in there, and we can have a direct line from Tulsa, that's Riverside, all the way down to Chandler, Arizona. Albuquerque's here, Amarillo is there. Just a direct flight. It's so much easier. But suppose I tell you we're going to go next week, and we've got seats. You want to go along with us? You can fly along with me if you want to. And if you want to go down and visit David and Karen Watkins, who live in Tucson, that's just a short drive. And so we make plans for that flight. First of all, I got to figure out, do we have enough fuel? Well, yeah, I've got enough fuel at 200 miles an hour to not only get to Chandler, Arizona on one trip, but would have 100 miles left over if we needed it. We check weather. Weather is good. There's a little bit of rain way up here, but that's out of our way, and I think some down here at the bottom. But weather's clear all the way from here to there, so no storms. That's good. We check our weight and balance, and we have plenty of useful load for 2 or 3 more people to go along with full fuel, no problem. We're going to miss all of the restricted areas along here. You don't want to go fly into those or you get in trouble. The MOAs, or the military operating areas, are not hot. That is, there's no military aircraft in that area in the time and the altitude that we're going to be going through there. So the plans are great. We've covered all the bases, but if I showed this plan to Dave and to Steve, they're going to say, Bob, that's a bad plan. What do you mean it's a bad plan? I've checked all these things out. Yeah, but they say, you see these little things all over the place, like this one right here? Those are winds aloft. And you're going to have a 40 or 50 mile an hour headwind almost all the way, and instead of being able to get there and have another 100 miles to go if you needed it, you're going to run out of fuel about right here. And if you look at the map closely, that's in a very hilly, mountainous area with sharp peaks. Well, do I have any choice in that matter? Yes, you do. You have about a 5-mile gliding area, and so you get to pick which peak you're going to crash into. What I'm saying is we can make plans and cover almost every detail, but oftentimes our plans fail because we leave out something maybe we don't even know about. Our plans are not like God's plans. God's plans aren't created poorly. His plans are impeccable, and they will always work unless we mess them up. Even this College of Architecture and Planning shows you how easy it is for those who are supposed to be good at this to mess things up. Man's plans are not always good, but God's plans are. And that's why these people should have recognized this is great news. Our God, who is infallible in his planning, who has resources to bring his plans about, who knows everything there is to know, has a plan for us to get us out of our misery and to give us a future that is bright. Does God have a plan for our nation? When we look at the condition of Judah in their captivity, we think, boy, those people were really in bad shape. But when we look at our condition in our time, things aren't looking real good either. I remember a time when God was not taken out of our schools. In grade school, every morning, our class would say the Pledge of Allegiance and include that phrase, one nation under God. Things have changed. Once a week on Wednesdays, we would have an all-school assembly where grades 1 through 12 would get together. And every one of those assemblies began with every student reciting the Lord's Prayer together. There were prayers at all of the football games. There were no school activities on Wednesday night because that was church night. There were no sports activities on Sunday, either by the schools or by the community, because that was a day of worship. There were no drugs, there were no methamphetamines, there was no crack cocaine, there was no marijuana in those days. And kids didn't have to feel like they had to color their hair an unusual color or pierce their nose and tongues and stick spikes in them or cover their bodies with tattoos in order to feel accepted or to feel like they were of some value. I remember when kids would go home from school, they would go home to a home that had a mother and a father and other siblings usually. And that mother and the father was the only mother and father that they ever knew. Today, 40% of our children born in America are born to unwed mothers. 13% of couples that are living together are living unmarried, shacking up together. I can remember when that ratio was 1%. And it's getting worse. Those people who are 30-ish age, 1/4 of them are shacking up. What do all these things tell us about the future of the family as God had planned it? I remember when we watched TV, you didn't worry about the content. There was no filthy language. There was no nudity, no sexual innuendos, no violent scenes where blood and guts were everywhere. Today's society would say, well, who would want to watch TV if they were like that? Well, obviously, not the majority. The programs that we used to watch most often supported a good moral lesson. I remember when there was a good work ethic, when people did not expect to get paid unless they worked. They couldn't just show up for work and expect to get a paycheck. Now it's hard to find people to work. Businesses are struggling to find enough employees to come in so that they can operate their businesses. When we went to bed at night, we didn't lock the doors. We didn't set the burglar alarm. When we even left home, we didn't lock the doors. We didn't have to because people respected others' property and their rights. I remember the days when preachers would get in the pulpit and they would be wearing a coat and a tie. Just teasing. It doesn't bother me if you want to get up here half-dressed. That's your option. Seriously, look at our nation today and its condition and the direction that it's going. We are told that about 1 out of every 5 person in America is in some kind of church assembly or synagogue this morning. Where's the other 80%? They're doing their own thing, ignoring the fact that God exists. Have we ever seen our nation overcome with such division, such unrest, unlawlessness, and such a disrespect for God? Does God have a plan for our nation? Someone tell me, please, that He does. And He does have a plan for us. It's the same plan that He had for Judah when they were despondent and covered up by the influences of unrighteousness. It's the plan that He told Solomon about. After Solomon had built the temple and dedicated it, God said to Solomon, Solomon, I've got a plan for this nation. Yes, they've been way out here off track, but now we have a place of worship. And if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. This was a plan for Solomon's time. It's the same plan that will be effective in our time if we will just follow it. God says, yes, your nation's messed up. It's got problems that you will never be able to solve on your own. But I have a plan, and my plan will work if you will simply follow it. Let's narrow the concept down a little bit. Does God have a plan for this church? If he has a plan for our nation, does he have a plan for this church? From the beginning, God did have a plan for his church overall. Ephesians 1:4 says, for he chose us in him before the creation of the world. Even before this planet was created, God said, I'm going to have a people. And my plan is these people are going to be blameless in my sight because I'm going to provide for them a Savior that will remove their sins and keep them pure in my sight. It seemed that God had a plan for those 7 churches in Asia. When we read in the second book of Revelation what God told John on Isle of Patmos to do, God said, John, write to these 7 churches. I have a message for them. Why does he have a message for them? Because they were not going according to what God had planned for them. And so to each of these 7 churches, God said, give them this message so that they can get back on track on what I want to take place in their lives. To the Ephesians, just some of the quick things he said to each of these. To the Ephesians, he says, I know your deeds, your hard work, and your perseverance. That's good. Yet I hold this against you. You have forsaken your first love. That's not what I'd planned for you. You need to get back and grab onto that first love and make it the guiding light of your life. To the Smyrna, he said, I know your affliction and your poverty, yet you are rich. But do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. I tell you, the devil will put some of you in prison to test you. Guys, you're doing all right now, but I'm afraid you may falter from my plan. So be prepared. Buckle up, because hard times are coming. To the church at Pergamum, he said, you did not renounce your faith in me in the days of Antipas, my faithful servant who was put to death in your city. Some of you probably saw your brother put to death, but that didn't cause you to waver. Nevertheless, he says, you people there, some of you are holding to the teaching of Balaam. That's not according to my plan. And I want you to be aware of that. To the church at Thyatira, he says, you tolerated that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess, but her teaching, she misleads my servants and into sexual immorality. Don't do that. Stop it. That's not what I have in mind for you. To the church at Sardis, he says, you have a reputation of being alive, but you're dead. That won't work, folks. Get back to where you need to be. I know that you have little strength yet and have kept my word, he says to Philadelphia. You're weak, but you're holding on. Keep doing it. Endure. Hang in there. That's what I want you to do. And to Laodicea, you know the common phrase, you're neither hot nor cold. Why did God have John write to these people? Because they weren't going along with his plan, or they were in a condition where they may be tempted to falter. To each of these churches, he says, to him who hath an ear, let him hear. To him who overcomes, and then he gives these little tidbits of blessings that they will receive. To the Ephesians, he said, if you overcome, I'll give you the right to eat of the tree of life. To the church of Smyrna, he says, if you overcome, you'll not be hurt at all by that second death. And to the church at Pergamum, he says, if you will overcome, I will give you some of that hidden manna. To others, I'll give you the authority over nations. You'll be dressed in white. I'll make you a pillar of my temple. I'll give you the right to sit on my throne. These were the blessings that he promised them. This was his plan for them. And this is his plan for us. If we will overcome and hold fast to the end, we can have these blessings that God's plan has in store for us. Well, let's narrow the scope once again. If God does have a plan for us as a church, does he have a plan for us individually? Does God care that much about what's going on? Or has he just created his kingdom, placed it on the planet Earth, and said, okay, guys, whatever will happen, see what you can do with this? In the early days, in the days of Jeremiah, God had a plan for Jeremiah. We read in the first chapter, verse 5, before I formed you in the womb, God says, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart from all the others. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. God had a plan from Jeremiah even before he was born. Did God have a plan for Joseph? You all know the story of Joseph and all that he went through when his brothers sold him into slavery. And there he was in Egypt as a slave, and yet God brought about his plan for Joseph so that Joseph became the prominent second to the king. And when his family needed food, Joseph was there. And when his brothers realized who he was and the power that he had, Joseph says to them, you intended to harm me. But God had a different plan. God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many. Yeah, God had a plan for Joseph, and he carried it out. Well, you say that was in the Old Testament, and God worked different in those days than he does in the New Testament. Well, looking at the New Testament, did God have a plan for Paul? He sure did. In Galatians 1, verses 15 and 16, Paul says, but when God, who set me apart from birth. Now, we don't really get into Paul's life until he's an adult. But even before he became an adult, from birth, God had set him apart. He called me by his grace. He was pleased to reveal his Son in me so that I might preach him among the Gentiles. That was God's plan for Paul. And you know what a wonderful outcome that plan had. Did God have a plan for John the Baptist? Oh, yeah. In John 1, verse 6, there came a man who was sent from God. That was God's plan. I'm going to send John to the earth, into the world, whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, to testify of Christ. And when the Jewish officials asked John, well, what about yourself? John says, in the words of Isaiah the prophet, I am the voice of the one calling in the desert. Make straight the way of the Lord. What was God's plans for John the Baptist? To prepare the way for Christ, to proclaim him, to point him out when he said, here is the Lord, here is the Messiah. He had a plan for them. You say, well, Paul and John the Baptist had these tremendous things. These were big plans, and it had to happen in order for God's kingdom to exist. Those were special people for special events. Well, let's look at someone who was not so special. What about that woman, that Samaritan woman from the city of Sychar, who met Jesus at the well? Look at that situation, not so much at the message that was given to her, but look at it in terms of the question, did God have a plan for her? So Jesus and his disciples are going from Judea up to Galilee, and they pass through Samaria, and they come to the city of Sychar. And they come to the well of Jacob. Jesus stays there while the rest of the disciples go into town to buy food, to get food. Surely it didn't take all of them, but this was what happened. They all left and left Jesus there by himself. In the middle of the day, at noontime, a woman from Sychar comes up. Now, she comes at a time when usually women do not go to the well. Usually the women go to the well early in the morning. And they usually go as a group, not as a single individual. This is a woman who, as you know the story, wasn't the prime example of godliness. She had had 5 husbands and assumingly had to divorce them all. She was now shacking up with the 6th person. Her life was really messed up. But yet she had a faith in God. She knew about the Messiah. And even though she had gotten off to a rough start, she ends up talking to Jesus. Coincidence? Or was it part of God's plan for her? And as they begin to talk, she learns that this is the Messiah. She goes back to the city and says, let me tell you of someone who tells me about everything in my life. He has to be the Messiah. Come and see. And so they go and they talk to Jesus. And because of her, many people in that city learn about the Messiah. Was that all just by coincidence? Or did God have a plan that she be able to enlighten the people of her city about who the Messiah really was? What about the story of Bobby Crute and Solomon Agu? Many of you know that. Those who don't, I'm going to very quickly just bring you up to snuff. Bobby Crute lived in Sand Springs, grew up here, brother to Connie Crute, who still lives here. He grew up, he left. I think he went to Tennessee or Kentucky, somewhere back east. From Africa, the country of Nigeria, came a man named Solomon Agu, who didn't know God, didn't care about Christ. He came here to be educated as an engineer, I think. I'm not sure. Somehow or another, he and Bobby's paths crossed, and Bobby converted him. After he becomes a Christian, he goes back to Jos, Nigeria, and he creates a school of biblical studies where preachers are trained and wives and women are trained. And by now, there's got to be 200, 300, 400 preachers. I don't know how many. 15 or 20 preachers a year graduate from that. And the 3 boys that we sent there to be educated from the LET team have now gone to Liberia, their home country. They have established 7 congregations comprising about 450 people. And they are assisting other churches that were there before them. And they too are training preachers. Was that coincidence? Or was that part of a plan that God had for Solomon Agu, maybe from his birth? Does God have plans for individuals, for you and I? Aren't we created to do good works? Ephesians 2:10 says we are. That means God has a plan for us. He made us to do good works. That's what he intends us to do. He has a plan for us to be involved in those things in order to glorify his name. Paul says we are like a body. We have different parts. Each part has a different function. Each of you has a different function. Why? Because that's the way God had planned it, so that we facilitate each other's needs and we work together to bring about God's plan. And Paul says we all have different gifts. We don't have the same gift. That means that your gift, the plan that God has for you is different from someone else, because we can't all do the same thing and bring about what God wants to happen. He has something for us in mind. Has he a plan for you? Well, you say he hasn't yet. Here I'm middle-aged and nothing spectacular has taken place in my life. How old was Moses before God enacted his plan for him to lead the people out of Israel? How old was Abraham before his first son came about to propagate in the world a nation for God? How old was Paul before he really began to fulfill the plan that God has for him? If you haven't been able to see how God has made a plan for your life so far, maybe the time is coming. And maybe that plan might just shock you as to what can be done. Does God have a plan for you? What is that plan? I don't know. I don't even know what God's plan is for me, but as I look back over my life, it seems that things just seem to have happened and fallen in place. And I got to think, God must have intended that to happen. What does he hold for the future? I don't know. But isn't it exciting to think that even there's a possibility that God, who makes plans that happen, who has the resources to bring them about, who has good intentions, all of that excitement and fulfillment may be in our future. If we will turn from our ways, if we will seek him, if we will pray to him, he will hear us. And he will heal our nation. He will heal our church. He will promote us in his kingdom to do great things. Does he have a plan for you? Look for it. Watch for it. You may be shocked. What a blessing it is to wake up every morning and think, what does God have in store for me today? What's his plan for me? It gives you a new perspective on how to go about your day's activities. Think about it as we stand and sing.
Would you live for Jesus and be always pure and good? Would you walk with him